بسم الله الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله الحمد لله حمدا كثيرا طيبا مباركا فيه يا ربي لك الحمد كما ينبغي لجلال وجهك وعظيم سلطانك اللهم أخلصنا نيتنا والأعمالنا يا أرحم الراحمين সম্মানিত দর্শক ভাই বোন তুজাহাল উম্মার দর্শক যারা যেখানেই আছেন সবাইকে আমাদের পক্ষ থেকে তুজাহাল উম্মার পক্ষ থেকে ফেস্ট উম্মার পক্ষ থেকে আসসালামু আলাইকুম রাহমাতুল্লাহি ওয়া বারাকাতুহু। অবশ্যই এই প্রোগ্রামের শুরুতে আপনাদেরকে অনুরোধ করব আপনারা লাইক করবেন, শেয়ার করবেন, ফলো করবেন, কমেন্টস করবেন। আজকের সেশনটা গত সপ্তাহে আমাদের যে সেশনটা আছে সেইটা আমাদের গেস্ট ডক্টর শেখ তাজুল ইসলাম, যিনি অধ্যাপক ইংল্যান্ডের ইউনিভার্সিটি লিডস ইউনিভার্সিটি ইংল্যান্ডে পড়ছে। তো এইখানের ইসলামিক স্টাডিজ এর মানে প্রফেসর উনি, মিডল ইস্টার্ন ডিপার্টমেন্ট যেটা আছে ওনার প্রোফাইলে আপনারা দেখতে পারবেন গত পর্ব থেকে। তো ওনার সাথে আমরা আজকেও কন্টিনিউ করতেছি। ওনার সাথে যে প্রথম পর্বটা ছিল সেটা আসলে ওই মান্তিক লজিক যুক্তি এবং ওয়াহির বিষয় নিয়ে আলোচনা আমরা করার চেষ্টা করছি। তো আপনারা যারা এটা মিস করছেন অনুরোধ করব যে আপনারা সম্পূর্ণ প্রোগ্রামটা দেখার চেষ্টা করবেন। অবশ্যই ইংলিশে ছিল, তো একটু ধৈর্য ধরে শোনার চেষ্টা করবেন, ফিডব্যাক দিবেন, কমেন্টস দিবেন অবশ্যই। আর আজকের সেশনটা ওইটার সাথে একটা সম্পর্ক আছে। আমরা আমাদের যে সেশনগুলো নিয়ে আসার চেষ্টা করতেছি আমরা মানে যে দুনিয়াত মনে করেন বিশেষ ইস্যুর মাধ্যমে যে ধর্মীয় বাস্তবতা চ্যালেঞ্জে আছে পজিটিভ দিক থেকে অথবা নেগেটিভ দিকে, এইসব বিষয়গুলো আমরা নিয়ে আসতেছি যেগুলো আমাদের উম্মাকে পজিটিভলি এফেক্ট করে অথবা নেগেটিভলি এফেক্ট করতে পারে। তো আজকে হইল গিয়া সংশয়বাদ প্রতিরোধের উপায়, সো ইংলিশে আমরা বলছি ডিলিং উইথ ডাউট এন্ড দ্য ডাউট ইন্ডাস্ট্রি। সো আমাদের সাথেই আছেন ডক্টর তাজুল ইসলাম, প্রফেসর of Islamic Studies from the University of Leeds. Dr. Saab, welcome. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Dr. Saab, we can't hear you.
Yes, Dr. Walaikum assalam.
How are you, Dr. Saab? Welcome.
Alhamdulillah, fine.
ভালো আছেন Dr. Saab?
ভালো আছেন।
আলহামদুলিল্লাহ। আমরা আজকে কি ইংলিশে না বাংলায় কথা বলবো ডক্টর সাহেব?
আমি চেষ্টা করব বাংলাতে, বাট মোস্ট লাইকলি ইংলিশে করাও লাগবে আমার।
ওকে, নো প্রবলেম ডক্টর সাহেব। ধন্যবাদ আপনারে, আপনি যে আপনার গুরুত্বপূর্ণ সময় দিয়ে আমাদের সাথে শরীক হয়েছেন। ডক্টর তাজুল ইসলাম, professor of Islamic Studies at the University of Leeds. Dr. Saab, last week we were talking about logic and revelation, the idea of the role of logic, the role of common sense, the role of mantik, and the role of revelation, whether there was a clash between the two or there is synergy between the two, and how the Muslims, when that subject came dominant, how they managed to navigate and deal with those matters much more smoothly maybe than sometime in as assumed sometimes. মানে আমাদের আগের আলিম উলামারা এই যে মান্তিক অথবা লজিক অথবা কমন সেন্স এবং ওয়াহির কে নিয়ে মানে পরিপূর্ণভাবে মনে করেন যে ওই দুইটাকে, এই লজিক অথবা কমন সেন্স অথবা মান্তিক যেটা বলে সেটাকে আমাদের মানে যে শিক্ষার একটা অংশ হিসেবে নিয়ে বিভিন্ন ভূমিকা এবং বিভিন্ন সমাধান রাখছেন এবং সবসময় ওয়াহিকে প্রধানতা দিচ্ছেন, কিন্তু মান্তিককে যে ফালায় রাখছেন এরকম কিছু না, এবং মান্তিক নিয়ে কোনো সমস্যা হয়েছে না। কিন্তু আমরা দেখছি যে অন্য সিভিলাইজেশন, বিশেষ করে খ্রিস্টিয়ানিটি বলেন অথবা জুডাইজম বলেন, ওরা আসলে এই 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 অংশকে মানে এই অংশকে ওদের জন্য বিভিন্ন দিক থেকে খুব কঠিন হয়েছে আর কি, যে ওইটা নিয়ে কিভাবে ডিল করতো আর কি। কিন্তু মুসলিম উলামা, philosophers আর যা বলেন না কেন, ওরা they have managed very well with philosophy and with logic and with rationality and so on and so forth, whilst being representative of the final message of the final messenger and the final revelation from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. তো আজকে আমরা যেটা নিয়ে ওইটার কানেকশন আছে আমাদের এই সাবজেক্টে, সেটা হলো যে সংশয়বাদ প্রতিরোধের উপায়। So dealing with doubt and the doubt industry. So সন্দেহ, where is the roots of doubt? মানে doubt as a philosophical concept, skepticism যেটাকে বলা যায় আর কি, ওইটার অবশ্যই একটা রোল আছে, সায়েন্সের সাথে একটা সম্পর্ক। So, Mani Atar, where has it come from? Where has it begun from? If you can give us a bit of a background into skepticism and doubt and how it has played out within world civilization, and then maybe more specifically within the Muslim community and some of the challenges that we face as Muslims whilst living in minority lands like the UK, as well as places like Bangladesh, where massive Muslim population exists, within which it's also having, through academia, it's been impacted in terms of thought process and how, the whole idea of questioning if there is a God, and the whole idea of being godly, godly or not, and so on and so forth. So the roots of doubt and skepticism, Dr. Saab.
Okay, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على سيد المرسلين وبعد السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. جزاكم الله خير في تجاه الأمة to give me this opportunity to share with you some ideas. So the question you asked, Ustad Yahya, was where do we actually find the roots of the notion of skepticism itself, or as a philosophical tradition? Well, as a philosophical tradition, really, it does go back thousands of years, right? So there were a group called the Sophists, or in Arabic, those of you that's in Nizami Zara person, Sufustaiya. So we find in Sharh al-Aqaid, said the Sufustaiya were the ones who actually, they doubted the reality of things, or the haqa'iq al-ashya. So they argued that haqa'iq al-ashya ghair thabita, that the reality of things are really not known for sure. And for that matter, there were some responses from our mutakallimun and the other falasifa. They argued that no, well, fire burns, right? Do you really doubt that fire burns, right? And if you doubt that, well, maybe we should light you on fire and see if you can experience this, right? Whether it does burn or not, incinerate or not. Now, so the doubt as a philosophical position is one which was, to an extent, you can say is Greco-Roman. In that sense, is part of the Greco-Roman world. At least one strand of that, right? Certainty is another, right? The way how you approach knowledge. And when it comes to the general concept of knowledge, human beings do have this tendency that we don't know. So that was the first. This is why you find some of the Sophists quoting Socrates. Later on, you find in our own tradition, Imam Malik saying La Adri. So there is a type of agnosticism as well that goes back to the early doubt tradition, if you like. Now, as for what you've termed the doubt industry, it's really probably more accurate to call it New Age atheism as such, right? Because even the New Age atheists, though they promote doubt in religion, they're very certain about. I'll just use an example here to sort of conceptualize this. David Hume actually says, I don't have enough faith to say that I am an atheist. And what he means by that as well, and that's the point that he actually, in his life as well, even though they used to call him the great infidel, the church called him, if you like, in Arabic, al-kafir al-kabir. But he did actually mention some things which many philosophers have not appreciated, is that sometimes doubt can actually, you need that for faith itself, right? Now, so going to you mentioned the Renaissance, right? Did this, the approach to knowledge is one that we don't, first of all, we don't know, and then we learn, right? And that's, you can argue is Quranic as well, that Allama al-insana ma lam ya'lam. There is a concept of, in the Quran about la raib. But la raib is something which is far more categorical than, say, la shakka, in that sense, right? There is no, or even zan, these terms that are there in the Quran. But what we see is this type of doubt first before certainty is a type of understanding that did permeate even our theological tradition as well, the Kalam approach as well. So they argued, like Imam al-Ghazali argued that ashakku awwalu darajatin ila al-yaqeen. So you do need doubt to get to certainty. But there is something that others have actually said as well, right? I believe it's Voltaire. If I've made a mistake, then I think Voltaire said, doubt is unpleasant, but certainty itself is absurd. Insofar as there's always an element of actually we have to convince ourselves about knowing something, right? Even if, with our five senses or intuition as well. Now, how we understand linking it to the Tao industry that you're talking about is really ultimately what's now termed the scientific method. And the scientific method is one which actually the Muslims invented in that sense. They were the ones who propagated this. It's not one that the ancient Greeks were comfortable with. The ancient Greeks were more rationalists. They were more interested in thinking out ideas than actually experimenting. In fact, they were the ones who argued, that definition of madness is to do one thing over and over again to expect different results. But that's what the scientific method is.
Yes.
You're supposed to do it again and again and again to see a different result. And this was, in the early phase of Muslim science, was this new approach, which was Ibn al-Haytham, possibly even al-Farabi, where they argued you need to abstract knowledge from perceived universals, in a sense, right? So everything's up for grabs in that sense. We have to experiment and see if something is true. So an approach was adopted, which we could call now, Karl Popper speaks about this, called falsification theory. So anything, really anything that's supposed to be scientific has to be falsifiable. Now, where you hinted towards the fact that even Muslims, Muslim cultures, actually even pious Muslims of the Madaris traditions as well, can be impacted by this doubt phenomenon, or if you like, this doubt episteme, this idea of doubt as a way of knowing things. We see that in at least one science of Islam, which is Ilm al-Hadith. Ilm al-Hadith is one which has actually taken a different approach to many of the other traditions like tafsir and kalam and even philosophy in general as well. Philosophy is okay in terms of argumentation. Where Hadith has taken an approach which very much we can argue is scientific, insofar as scientific in its modern definition. There is a postmodern definition of science, but the modern definition is, unfortunately, the Muslims are still dealing with the onslaught of modern scientific knowledge. Postmodern scientific knowledge is a little bit different in that sense, right? So modern scientific knowledge is what you've alluded to, what Yahya Bhai just alluded to, was phasing God out of the equation. So when God is removed from the equation, then you're only really left with doubt as such, right? And now in postmodern science, God being there is actually no problem whatsoever. So one of the things that the doubt industry, or the doubt episteme, should we say, the doubt idea brought about, was this idea of, or this notion of, there's such a thing as objective truth. Now, objective truth is something that we can all appreciate, we can all access. So our experience in this world, right, our sensory perceptions of pain and pleasure and all these things, all of us more or less can ascertain this. How we feel certain things might be slightly different. And so that you'd call subjective. So there's an objective knowledge that all of us can gain, and there's subjective knowledge. So the objective knowledge is knowledge that we can know through learning. And subjective knowledge might be knowledge that we can only really gain through intuition. In the past, the scientific method ignored subjective knowledge, whereas even some of our own theologians, our mutakallimun, our muhaddisun, our fuqaha, rejected subjective knowledge. So in many ways, they too approached ilm in this scientific sort of, what they argued is the default stance of science is skepticism. And then through experimentation, you arrive at certainty. And this is something which many other Muslim philosophers as well recognize, this chasm in terms of what's taking place. So Iqbal actually mentions this as well. He wasn't browbeaten, if you like, by the progress of Western sciences. Because look, a lot of the sciences, they were done on deeply unethical
Foundation.
grounds, deeply unethical. Experimenting on human beings. They did this, during the colonial era. They also did it in America on their own citizens, especially black citizens. And we know that the Nazis did this with during the Holocaust. They actually experimented on human beings, prisoners of war, etc. And and we can see this, that this is a lot of the strides of science, progress does come at a price in that sense. Look, everything that we see now, we're talking about climate change, that we've got responsibility. Look, European civilization, or everything that is achieved, has been achieved by destroying the planet, right? And in fact, now you're asking everyone else to go back to a pre-modern time. The trauma of modernity on most of the world is still, the repercussions we're still feeling, right? They're talking about carbon footprint. There's still people who still walk barefooted, right, around the world, right? And they're most likely they're not Europeans. So what I would say about the foundations of doubt itself, does it actually come from the Enlightenment? Yes, it does to an extent. And what happens is because of the French Revolution as well, is this disenchantment from religion. And we as Muslims have to try to appreciate this, that, well, our deen is very different from Christianity. Christianity is a totalitarian tradition, at least the Catholic churches. Look, we can see this now with all this, the abuse claims as well, right? Thousands, hundreds of thousands in France. And we saw this also in Canada as well, where there was a genocide that was carried out against children in Canada. And that's our power, that's our absolute power certain religions have had. Islam, we haven't had that. Both, all of our different sectarian traditions, we don't have, a Shaykh al-Islam isn't the same as the Pope. We didn't have that type of power where our own peoples would rebel against whoever had ultimate authority. We know this for a fact. Our umara, our leaders, and our ulama never had absolute authority over everybody. So what we saw with the Europeans was really the power of the church. So the power of the church was challenged by the French, and that's when they pushed for this idea of laicity, this idea of secularism, that really given to Caesar what is due unto Caesar. So they used the religion to argue for secularism. They used, words from Christ. Then what happens is actually, because you mentioned, we tend to look at the academy as the result of capitalism, but in fact, the intellectual tradition very much was cultivated within a Marxist type critique of the world, right? In that sense, and that's why you do find a lot of the right wing now really complaining about the fact that they use these words, cultural Marxism, right, to argue against the academy. Now, what's happened as a result is so that doubt that they used against Christianity, they tried to use against the other religious traditions as well. And for a while, it worked under colonial rule. So they tried to argue that, look, all of these religious traditions are backwards, and it's only through the European Enlightenment, look how we conquered the world. Maybe these people can enjoy the privileges that we've gained over, abandoning religion.
Dr. Sheikh Tajul Islam, just coming back to you, just to welcome আমাদের দর্শক যারাই এখন জয়েন করছেন, ওয়েলকাম, আপনারা সবাইকে শুভেচ্ছা স্বাগতম। আজকে আমরা তুজাহাল উম্মার পক্ষ থেকে আরেকটা সেশন নিয়ে আসছি। Face the Ummah invites you to another session today with Dr. Sheikh Tajul Islam, professor at the University of Leeds in Islamic Studies. আজকের সাবজেক্ট ম্যাটারটা হইতেছে সংশয়বাদ প্রতিরোধের উপায়, so dealing with doubt and the doubt industry, এবং আমরা যেটা মানে আলোচনা শুরু হয়েছে যে এই যে সন্দেহ অথবা স্কেপটিসিজম যেটা বলা হয়, অথবা কোয়েশ্চেনিং যেটা বলা হয়, এটার রুটস কোথা থেকে এবং মুসলিমদের এটার সাথে কি রকম ইন্টারাকশন এবং এটার কি রকম রূপ নিতেছে বিভিন্ন সমাজে বিভিন্ন দিক থেকে। মনে করেন যে ডেভেলপিং ওয়ার্ল্ড যেটাকে বলা যায় কি, অথবা যে টার্ম ইউজ করা হয় বাংলাদেশ অথবা আশেপাশে যে দেশগুলো এক্সাম্পল, অথবা আফ্রিকার কিছু দেশগুলো, আর ডেভেলপড ওয়ার্ল্ড যেটাকে বলা হয়, মনে করেন যে ইউকে, আমেরিকা, কানাডা, ফ্রান্স ইত্যাদি ইত্যাদি। তো ডক্টর তাজুল ইসলাম যেটা ডিসকাশন করাচ্ছিলেন, যে উনি বলছেন যে এই যে স্কেপটিসিজম অথবা কোয়েশ্চেনিং এর একটা রুট ছিল গ্রিক এবং রোমানের, মানে ওই ফিলোসফিক্যাল যে বড় বড় প্রতিনিধিরা আর কি, ওদের সময় থেকে এটার একটা অংশ আসছে। ইভেন আমাদের দিনের শিক্ষার একটা অংশ ভিতরে এই সাবজেক্ট ম্যাটার জায়গা আছে, অথবা ইভেন হাদিসের ভিতরে আমরা ওই যে Sheikh, you talked about falsification, and so the whole science of mustalahat and ilm rijal and so on and so forth, in which there is a scientific methodology like science, if you like, you keep doing it until you get the right rijal, if you like, in narrating and connecting the chains up all the way back to the honored beloved sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So yeah, going back to you, Dr. Sheikh Tajul Islam, আপনি এই যে ফ্রান্সে কি হইতেছিল যে ধর্ম এবং রাষ্ট্রের একটা কি স্প্লিটিং এর কাজ শুরু হয়েছিল আর কি, এবং এইটার ফিনোমেনন কিভাবে ইউরোপে রূপ দিছে, এরপরে এটার ইমপ্যাক্ট কিভাবে মনে করেন যে দুনিয়ার বিভিন্ন জায়গাতে আসছে। প্লিজ
একটু আমি বাংলার শব্দ ইউজ করব,
প্লিজ হোকা,
because you've mentioned France. তো আমরা বাংলাতে সেকুলারিজম শব্দটা কি তাই ব্যবহার করি,
ধর্ম নিরপেক্ষতা। I think
that's not what secularism is. Right? And that's the problem, that unfortunately laicity is in French, laicity is deeply anti-religious. Right? And that's why France, look, we can see how deeply Islamophobic they are. And remember, they used to be deeply anti-Semitic. Right? They're pro-Christian. This is one thing about the Christmas trees are fine.
So আমরা যেটা হইতে চাই যে ফ্রান্স, আমরা যত মনে করি না ফ্রান্স সেকুলার এবং সেকুলার, আসলে ফ্রান্স কি সেকুলার, আসলে আমরা কি সেকুলারিজম কি তা বুঝি, এটা বলতেছি
ধর্ম নিরপেক্ষ না, it is ধর্মের বিপক্ষে, that's what it is supposed to be. Look, this is the reason why is India not a Hindu rashtra per se. It's supposed to be a secular state. But the problem is secularism is against Hinduism too. That's the reason why you got these Hindu nationalists. They said hum Pakistan ki tarah hona chahte hain, right? We want to be a Hindu rashtra, like Pakistan is a Islamic republic, right?
Yeah.
So that's the problem.
That contradicts secularism, you're saying.
It does.
Direct contradiction.
I come across many of my in my experience with Jewish students, they openly say this, look, secularism is bad for Jewish identity, right? And that is the case for the state of Israel, because if it was a true secular, it's not a secular state, it is a ethno-religious state. If it was secular, then it has to incorporate the Palestinians and all these other religious minorities, including the Christians. The Christians are suffering there as well with the Muslims. So when we go back to the idea of secularism itself, so dharma nirapekha is not exactly dharma viruddhita in that sense.
Dharma viruddhita, is that what you're saying?
That's what it is. No, but we have to understand that this is why in the 1980s, Margaret Thatcher, Ronald Reagan, they were willing to fight the communists, right? So they armed the Mujahideen to fight the communists, and they said that, look, this is what godless atheism does. Secularism ends with atheism in that sense. True atheism, secularism is atheistic, is Marxist. And this is why there's an element of people critique Marxism as a type of secular religion. Ultimate secularism is Marxism, right? Is the Bangladesh was the Jashad Party, right? They are ultimately, those cadres are very much what the end result of true secularism is. So the problem is that we tend to think that secularism itself, and this is where the Renaissance comes in, is in Arabic as well. There's been a big problem. So in Bangladesh, we saw secularism is translated as dharma nirapekha. In Arabic, they've translated it as ilmaniya. It's actually almaniya, right? I'll explain what it is. So they've translated secularism as if it's almaniya, it makes more sense because it's
as in God is out the question. Almani.
Yeah, no, almaniya, it means it's from the alam, so right. the world. So that's all right. That's very much like the secularum in in Latin. So it is the world. But once you've done it ilmaniya,
Mhm.
You've made it knowledge based. That secularism is connected with science.
Yeah.
An easy translation in Arabic would have been dunyawiya, which is fine. The dunya is something which is profane, which is lowly.
Why is that not very general though? It's
No,
very
they did
wide.
this on purpose. Look, they thought about this deeply, right?
Yeah.
So it was initially Almania,
Mm.
and then they realized, look, if the Muslims are to progress and other societies, they have to be scientific. Science is what will deliver humanity. This is what they're arguing, right? So for that reason, they changed it to Ilmania. And the problem is this is what we, as not only as Muslims, right? Of course, the Ummah, the Ummah matters here, right? Because we are from the Ummah. Many of the other Ummahs as well, they need to realize that the world can't be shaped through white people and Christianity and the Christian experience. So for them, look, their wars have been wars of how they see the world through the Bible. So for them, Jews killed Christ, and they've always had an issue with Jews, right, through the Bible. Ourselves, look, we don't have this relationship with religion where we thought we have to abandon religion to be able to. I mean, look, the Turks have tried. What happened? They don't even want them in the EU, right? Now they're turning towards religion. They're going to become the kings of Asia instead of the dogs of Europe, right? And I mean, this is unfortunately this is the case because of the history of Turkey always petrified Europe, right? And they took ages to really thwart Turkey's influence. So what I'm saying is this is to use Ali Shariati. Ali Shariati is a famous Iranian philosopher. He actually argued that, look, we have to understand what atheism is, right? We've always had atheists. There's atheist traditions. Buddhism is an atheist religion. So the idea of having no God is the same as shirk, as far as we're concerned, right? Mm-hmm. So because no God is like many gods in that sense, right? And that's why they only ever considered atheism as ilhad, which is the same as shirk. Generally speaking, that's how they looked at it. They're the they're the ones who deny God's signs. That's what it is. You're denying God's signs, God himself. And so what he argued, Ali Shariati, was that atheism is actually a reaction of Christianity. All right? Mm-hmm. Because Christianity itself argues that God died. Mm-hmm. Right? And this is why you'll see in Catholic theology as well, this idea of, well, God is dead for me. This is the type of thing that we see that in Nietzsche and others as well. And then, in fact, the fact that the faith is based on this idea of killing God, right? What happens when you kill God? When you kill the king, you become the king. That's why the king is dead, long live the king. And this is what's happened to all of the natural sciences that we can think of, right? All the natural sciences, physics, biology, chemistry, they were all part of, in Oxford and Cambridge, they were part of the disciplines of divinity. So they were actually part of theology. And even in our own tradition, physics, alchemia, ilm al-tashrih, biology, I believe, in the old days, ilm al-tashrih. All of this was part of, effectively, is part of Kalam as well, because it's part of those ulum al-aqliya, right? Now, so what happens is that experience of Christianity and its relationship with its peoples is being supplanted on the rest of the world. And in many ways, it's not working because look, what's happening is we're seeing the rise of religion.
Sorry, doctors, আপনি যেটা বলতেছেন যে মানে যে Christianity এবং রাষ্ট্র ওই দুইটা মানে একটা টেনশন ওভার টাইম ডেভেলপ হয়েছে এবং এই টেনশনের যে আউটকাম যেটা সেটা মনে করেন যে কলোনিয়ালিজমের ভিতরে এক্সপ্রেস করা হয়েছে এবং এর পোস্ট after colonialism we're still facing this whole idea of the thrust from a Christianity that has upset its own people.
Yeah, I mean, look, they're struggling still. In America, the abortion laws, that's basically canon law. So আমাদের যেভাবে শরিয়া আছে, ইহুদিদের হালাকা, হিন্দুরার ধর্মশাস্ত্র, তার শরিয়ত, and then the Christians have canon law, kanun, right? and in canon law, abortion is haram to them, right? So this is something which is deeply politicized.
এই জন্য
but
আমেরিকাতে মানে এই জন্য আমেরিকাতে এটা নিয়ে এত মানে সুস্পষ্ট কোনো ডিসিশন নেওয়ার মানে পথ নাই. It's very difficult because of that. It's embedded within their tradition and within their laws
exactly, right.
and heritage.
Exactly. So this is the thing that they are seeing as well. Now, what else we're seeing now is, see, one of the things they want everybody else to have doubt, but certainty is in certain ideologies. So in the past, this is Maulana Maududi and others, Ali Shariati is another who spoke about this. And so the confident ideologies. So when religions were dead, they argued religions were dead. Ideologies became confident. And all of these ideologies came out of the secular experience, the secular experiment, should we say, because it is a secular experiment. World War II is an experiment of ideas, both of them European ideas. One of them is fascism, and the other one was Marxism, right? And we saw millions and millions died in these wars. That all of humanity, you can't compare the type of bloodshed that's taking place. So what was other people's critique after World War II? We'd rather go back to religion, right? That's what happened with the, as a post-colonial reality, when the Europeans left.
ডক্টর সাহেব, আপনি খুব সুন্দর একটা কথা বলছেন যে মানে বিশ্বযুদ্ধ 1 অথবা 2 এর পরে পণ্ডিত যারা ওরা বলতেছে আসলে আমরা ধর্মের কাছে আবার ফিরে যাওয়া উচিত, এই কথাটা আপনি বলছেন। কিন্তু আমরা যুগে আমরা দেখতেছি বলা যে ধর্মই দুনিয়ার যত যুদ্ধ আছে সবগুলি তৈরি করে।
Christianity is definitely, Christian dharma has caused the most facade and most genocide in the history of man. Christian dharma.
কিন্তু এটা আমাদের সময় এখন এটা অ্যাপ্লাই করে মেইনলি মুসলমানদের উপরে, যা
মুসলমানদের উপরে, আর also all of the old the new world. So America, Canada, America, Latin America, যত লোক যারা আছে, Aborigines in South Africa, in Australia as well, they did this forced conversions of look, one of the things we always say this, আমরা বাংলাদেশ হিন্দু আছেন, right? আমরা বুদ্ধ আছেন, আমরা Pakistan there's Indians, right? Afghanistan there's Hindus, right? From before.
That's right. The Sikhs,
right? Buddhists as well, all this sort of stuff. Egypt, there's still millions of Christians, right?
Yeah.
You have in Sudan, you have animists and many
Morocco, you have Jews. Iran, you have Jews.
Exactly. Still, all of this stuff. Europe is the only place. There's no other indigenous religion other than Christianity. How does that happen?
So আপনি কি বলতেছেন যে খ্রিস্টানিটির ভিতরে ওই লা ইকরাহা ফিদ-দ্বীনের কোনো কনসেপ্ট আছে?
They don't have that. There is no. They actually argue no quarters. God will kill them all, and then God will know who's his people or not. When they went on the Crusades, they didn't know what to do because they were told by the Pope, then Pope Urban, that these Saracens. Now, what that means is that we're basically Jews, not of Sarah. We're Jews of Hagar. That's how they framed the Muslims in those days. So these are Saracens, not of Sarah, right? So we're the slaves, children. That's how they looked at us. When they went to the Crusades, what they did was they killed Jews on the way because of the Star of David and everything. And then they found it very strange. They saw, the crucifix. So there were Christians in the Middle East.
Yeah.
They didn't know what to do with them. And the Pope said, kill them all, right? They're only because they said they're not Christians. They're not Christians. They're bearers of the cross. That's what they call them, bearers of the cross. So afterwards as well.
Is that Dr. Shab, এই যে কথাটা বললেন যে একটু ক্রুসেডের ইতিহাস নিয়ে আসতে হচ্ছে আপনার এই কথার ভিতরে আমি বুঝতেছি। তাহলে তো আপনি যে মানে on the way to Jerusalem ওরা bearers of the cross তাদেরকে বলা হয়েছে, মনে করেন পোপ আরবানের পক্ষ থেকে ফাতোয়া দেওয়া এই বিষয়ে। তো আমাদের তো ধারণা যে খ্রিস্টানিটির সবচেয়ে কাছের খ্রিস্টান মানুষ হইল যারা আরব দেশগুলোতে যারা বসবাস করতেছে, মানে in terms of their understanding and their closeness to the message of Christ, we're saying that we're finding more of them that are from if you like Middle East. So for example, but then what you're saying is that the Pope at that time was saying that even they're not acceptable people.
Yeah, they're not acceptable.
Although they probably were the most closest to Christ. Historically,
right.
geographically, and
Historically
so
as
on.
well. Yes, that's what it is. The thing is, we have to understand Europe has identified itself as not Muslim. What it means is because they were surrounded by Turks on one side and the Umayyads on the other, right? Because of that reason, the non-Christian was always going to be Muslim. Because remember, they had no access to China, they didn't have access to India, right? They didn't have access to Africa. In many ways, they were surrounded. The way how they felt, they were just besieged by Muslims on all sides. So they saw the Muslims as their infidels. That's it, right? Whereas ourselves, look, we saw, the Ahlul Kitab were already there, but not even the Ahlul Kitab, the Hindus and others as well, the Majus as well. We dealt with them as Ahlul Kitab, right? Even if the ahkam will not be the same, the Ahl Dhimma included the mushrikeen and everybody else that was there. So look, my point is this: is that with Christianity was instrumental in colonizing a lot of these lands. So that's why right now you see China is probably one of the most cleverest countries in dealing with missionaries in that sense. So what they do is they've nationalized religion, Christianity. So what they've done is nobody can come into China and just preach Christianity, because a lot of the times these Christians missionaries, they serve the colonial agenda, and they did that in Africa and elsewhere. And this is one of the reasons why a lot of Christians and Westerners just don't understand. You're the ones who hate your own Christians. And why is it when there's problems in the Muslim world and other parts of the world? Look, India is very intolerant towards Christians and Christian missionaries because of they do see it as a, basically Western imperial adventures as well, right? And the church has been co-opted by, the militaries for, all these militaries. The church gives the blessings. Any of these wars, Afghanistan, Iraq, the blessings of the church is there, right? So if war crimes have been committed, if the war is a failure, then it goes back to the church. They're the ones who sanctioned it. So my point is this: is that look, we have to realize that although to the rest of the world they're preaching no religion, they're very comfortable in their own Christian identity. They're, religion is okay for them. It's just they want atheism for the rest of us, right? And the honest truth is, we'll never be accepted as atheists. This is the ultimate truth, right? They'll always look at Turkey, the secularists in Turkey, right? These people, they just need to go out in Europe and see how they refer to them. They'll still call them Muslims even if they're atheists. Yeah, and that's the point where we have to understand that atheism itself, and even doubt, as you say, only they're allowed to doubt, right? You're not intelligent enough to doubt, but they push doubt on us because we doubt our own identity, we doubt our own history, and that's a way of weakening our own identity. There's something what happens to also science. So when Nietzsche said God is dead, right? This is just kufr, but I'm just saying it for right. So he said this, that God is death. Look, we say Inna Allah hayyun la yamut, right? Alhamdulillah, all our answers are already there. The Quran says it. Look, this man said what he said, Inna Allah hayyun la yamut. So he when Nietzsche said this, and remember, Iqbal calls him the Hakim of Europe, Nietzsche, because what Nietzsche said as well is that we've actually we've divorced ourselves from religion, and that divorce is an unhealthy divorce. Right now, one of the biggest problems for Europe now is identity. Now, the problem is there's a lot of musibah on the ummah. We know for the past 200-300 years there's been musibah upon musibah on the ummah. Notwithstanding that, in 1979, when the Iranian Revolution happened, and I'm going to link it to more recently as well, what happened was that you saw Jean-Paul Sartre, Jacques Derrida, many of these other philosophers, leftist philosophers, Marxist philosophers as well, who actually were scratching their heads, right? That how is it that how can religion cause a revolution? Because the French Revolution is about people revolting against religion. Because for them, religion is the opium of the masses, is false. How is it that religion has done this? And they were philosophers, they were people who were willing to accept truth. There's something's going on here. They went to Iran, they met up with Tabatabai, Shariati, and all these others. Now what's happening as well, we've seen with the recent the failure of the war on terror, the Taliban are back in power. What are political philosophers speaking about now? They're saying this is the victory of ideology. They're actually arguing this and its identity. Even the Taliban themselves, they're talking about themselves as a liberation movement, right? We are a liberation movement. We're nationalists. This is our country. They've learned the language now, right? of realpolitik. But the point is this: is that look, if religion was so irrelevant, how is it re-emerging everywhere now? And this is where your question of the doubt industry is very much failing as well. And what they're trying to use is, I'll give you an example about doubt, right? So there was an author called Tom Holland a number of years ago. You probably heard of, right? He introduced something in a theory called Hagarism from the 1970s. So this is part of the doubt, especially casting doubt on Islam, on the origins of Islam. So Hagarism is an idea that Islam and the Prophet ﷺ, they were a Jewish sect. So this is what they say, the Musalmanra ekta Ehudi firqa chile, right?
Is that the reason why they call it Hagarism?
That's why they call it Hagarism, because we're from Hajar alayhi salam.
Rooted back to Hajar alayhi salam,
huh? And it's also supposed to be pejorative, right? So they're from Sarah, the Yehuda from Sarah, we're from Hagar. Hagar is a concubine, is a Jariya, Bandi Beti, that's what they're trying to say. Now, so she's our mother. She's our mother, right? Alhamdulillah. Now, what they're arguing is that Islam was Judaism. It's just it was an Arab Jewish sect. That's it. Now, what happens is they're arguing that this is these people's, Wansborough, Patricia Crone, and Michael Cook. They argued that Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam didn't exist. So what they're doing is they did this with other religions. They try to argue Jesus didn't exist. They try to argue that, and this is Marxist, by the way. This is a Marxist strategy, the way they talk about all of these religions are mythologies, right? They're not historical characters. So they tried this with the Prophet, and they said basically, and they're really pushing it. A lot of these New Age atheists, Sam Harris, many of the others are pushing this. So on the one hand, this is the problem with this doubt nonsense, right? They're saying, look, Muhammad didn't historically exist, right? Well, then if he didn't, then there's no religion as Islam. And if there's no religion as Islam, there's no Islamic terrorism, there's nothing. Yeah. Okay, another thing is, the same people, so Muhammad didn't exist, but then he killed the Yahud of Bani Nadir and Bani Musta'alak, right?
Kainuka.
Kainuka as well, right? So all three of those groups. Yeah. So they killed all of these Jews, yet he didn't exist. Do you see the problem with this? So sometimes doubt is used, has a propagandative element to it.
Well, it seems like it's Doctor. It seems like the ones who are trying to add value to doubt, it seems that doubt is full of contradictions itself.
Absolutely, and this is one of the reasons why can absolute certainty be achieved? And this is something Allama Iqbal actually said. One of the chapters of the reconstruction, is religion possible? Right? In that sense, it's the whole idea of yaqeen in that sense, right? And this is something, there'll always be a subjective element. But look, Muslims have always, at least, our Sufyan as well, our Zuhad, our Mutakallimun, many of them, Ibn al-Qayyim, Imam al-Ghazali, Maulana Rumi, they were quite comfortable with the idea that of subjectivity, right? That knowledge, there can be subjective paths to knowledge, paths that you can't really gain through study, normal study. It's actually through intuitive paths, right? How do we know certain things are wrong? Yes, the law teaches us that, but at times it's also the fitrah. The human fitrah is something which is not really objective. It's something which is subjective. We just agree that yes, our nafs says that this is wrong. There's something wrong with the, with certain positions that human beings might take against each other, right? So in that sense, look, we're living in a time now where science itself, look, has moved on. And I'll give you some examples of this. Is that psychology is something Iqbal spoke about. That look, psychology came out of the study of religious texts. So they argued, because of that secular mindset, that religion is madness. So if religion is madness, then these religious leaders would have been psychologically, they've got mental problems. And that's how they approached many of the Freud and others. They just spoke of religious leaders as if there was some sort of neurosis in their heads. So psychoanalysis comes out of that tradition. Now what's happened is, and this is what Iqbal rightly said at the time, he says, look, behavioral psychology has a problem, right? That is only looking at behavior without looking at the human being as a whole, because they completely deny the spirit. Look, the brain isn't just electrical impulses. There's something else going on there. Like there's millions and millions of neurons there, right? And he's arguing that what's happened is our Sufism as well, our Zuhud, Suluk, whatever you want to call it. I know people might have issues with the term Sufism, but our ulum al-qalb, in that sense, the sciences of the heart, likewise ignored. They're concentrating on the spirit and ignored, if you like, behaviorism in that sense. So the sociological aspect of these things. And this is something now we're finding in certain sciences, is what's called transpersonal psychology as well. Psychology that actually accepts very much some of the premises that many religious traditions, right, speak about, the mystic traditions as well, about the soul and the spirit and this connection to in our mystic traditions, you got the 7 Lataif, right? They call it the 7 Lataif. And then you got in the Hindu tradition, the 7 chakras. A lot of these things that, yes, you can argue, is it Islamic, is it not? Look, we can always have these arguments. Every science very much is shared human knowledge. We do share from each other. One other thing I would like to say is the fact that when we think of the knowledge that we're gaining now, right? So knowledge in the 20th century and 21st century, why is it that there is a reluctance from our ulama kiram, our madaris, to incorporate some of like sociology, psychology, and some of the natural sciences as well, biology, physics? And the only reason I can say that there's been an aversion to this, and possibly there's a good reason for it. I'm not saying that it's completely. I actually argue that we do need to incorporate these things at the moment. The reason is, in the past, foreign knowledge was incorporated from cultures that were effectively dead, right? So the Greeks and the Romans, right? Or that we Muslims conquered, these other cultures and just incorporated. They had a confidence over the knowledge that they've encountered. Right now, the problem is that we've been colonized, and there is a type of natural resistance.
So what you're saying, I suppose, is that like the body is already the body is under the control of someone else, so they don't also want the mind to also be overwhelmed as well.
Yeah, that's the reason why it can become very hard for us to accept this. My apologies.
No problem.
So what we see is, so the first wave of Hellenism was when Greek works were translated into Arabic, the first round of books. Then there was a second wave where a lot of this knowledge was incorporated and was, you can say, translated in the language of Ash'ariism, of the other Mutakallimin as well, Mu'tazilism, and even the traditionalists, Hanabila as well. And the third wave of Hellenism is obviously during the British Raj and the French. That's when it becomes difficult, because look, most cultures did try to resist, the knowledge of the colonial powers. We're the only community, the Muslims, that has its own tradition that resisted colonialism. So the madrasa has a unique contribution to all decolonial causes. And this is something, look, our ulama need to step up their game and recognize this, that you have this. Look, you've almost like abstracted it from time. And that's a criticism people say, like that it's outside of time, this thing, they're in a time warp type stuff. But nonetheless, it's still from a period, the Madaris from east to west, from Indonesia to Mauritania and Central Africa and Turkey, all of that tradition, we can see has been a resistance to absolute epistemological dominance, Western knowledge dominance over everyone. So this is something that, look, we have our own alternatives. We do have, our own scientific, and this is something we sometimes don't realize in academia as well. If it wasn't for Hadith studies in the West, then today most of these oral cultures wouldn't be studied. So they would have, because the arrogance of the West, they've just ignore anything that's from oral traditions because they just think that it's just Chinese whispers, it's nonsense. So when they try to dissect Hadith, they actually realize it's a very scientific method. And in fact, most of that method then translated into the historical grammatical method. So that's, if you like, that's a science of how you study history. So a lot of the Asma or Rijal, the Jarh and Ta'dil approaches of orality, of the written word, if you like, the archaeology of Hadith and the anthropology of Hadith. So there's the writing aspect is the archaeology of Hadith, and then there's the anthropology, which is the Rijal al-Hadith, the Shafahat and how knowledge has come down to us. All of these things very much influenced, the Orientalist scholars, then influenced other disciplines, because many of the Christians were fascinated with obviously the imperial study of Islam, the colonial study of Islam. And then when they realized is, wow, we could apply this in our own traditions, or even the secularists could apply it on both the Jewish and the Christian traditions as well. The Jewish tradition had something similar. But the Christian
are you then referring this to the roots of what is known as Orientalism?
I am talking about, I'm saying that even the Orientalist tradition itself, because it critiqued the Hadith, it then influenced the way how history is taught for other cultures. Right. And then what's happened now is, now they're arguing that before they'd say, there's no way you can preserve anything for more than 10 years or more than 50 years, because they use Christianity as 50 years. Now they're saying 150 years. That's okay with Islam. 50 years Hadith has been more or less been documented, more or less, right, in that sense. And it doesn't matter. 150 years later, we can see that the Jawami, the Musnadat, the Masanid, they're all appearing at that time. So one thing that I would like to say is the power of confidence is one of the key things. And this is something which Iqbal mentioned about Khudi, right? That really you should embolden the nafs in that sense, and in the positive ego sense, not in the, pardon me, right? Alhamdulillah, in the negative ego sense, right? So if you have confidence, then what you can achieve is a direction towards achieving, some sort of reclaiming our own histories in that sense. And we have that potential in ourselves as a community.
Jazakallah khair, Dr. Sheikh Tajul Islam, Professor of Islamic Studies, Leeds University. দর্শক ভাই বোন যারাই জয়েন করছেন, আপনাদের সবাইকে শুভেচ্ছা, স্বাগত তুজাহাল উম্মার পক্ষ থেকে, ফেইস্তা উম্মার পক্ষ থেকে। আজকের পর্ব আমরা এই ডক্টর শেখ তাজুল ইসলাম আমাদের সাথে আবার আসছেন, এবং সেটা হইল যে সংশয়বাদ প্রতিরোধের উপায়। আমরা তো এই সন্দেহ যে জিনিসটা, ডাউট, স্কেপটিসিজম যেটা বলা হয় আর কি ইন ইংলিশ টার্মস, এইগুলোর রুট এবং এইগুলোর প্রভাব কিভাবে আমাদের সমাজে অথবা একাডেমিয়া উপরে পড়ছে অথবা দুনিয়ার উপরে পড়তেছে আর কি। এইগুলো নিয়ে আমরা আলোচনা করতেছি। আপনারা অবশ্যই লাইক করবেন, শেয়ার করবেন, ফলো করবেন, কমেন্টসও দিবেন ইনশাআল্লাহ। আমাদের হাতে আর বেশ সময় নাই, উই হ্যাভ অ্যানাদার about 25 minutes ইনশাআল্লাহ। এটার ভিতরে আমরা চেষ্টা করব ডক্টর শেখ তাজুল ইসলামের একটু পরিচয় নেওয়ার জন্য, ওনার অ্যাজ এ পার্সন, এন্ড অফ কোর্স ওনার কাছ থেকে যে ওনার এই উম্মতের জন্য সবচেয়ে 5টি প্রয়োজনীয় কি কি প্রায়োরিটিজ উনি মনে করেন উম্মার জন্য আর কি। ডক্টর শেখ তাজ, just to connect with the discussion that we have at hand, with giving all the background, Now, the thing is, do you find that whatever form of doubt is being pushed in our time, that there is a very strong connection of science working along with money? So if you like, like the capitalism and the different and the various form it has taken across the globe, are working together and almost finding that the more doubt we can create in societies, the better it becomes for us to push our resources, push our infrastructure, push our income making or greed agenda much more stronger. So are they working together, or you feel no, that's not the case?
I think Maslow speaks about the hierarchy of needs, and Rostro. Maslow speaks about the hierarchy. So Rostro spoke about one of the processes of modernity, and he actually argued one of the things that happens is the definition of a developing country is the last stage of modernization is actually consumerism. So so one aspect is science. So in that sense, you're right, the science, and then the other aspect is consumerism. Once you become a consumer society, then really technically called modern. Now, the problem with Rostro's theorizing is that, well, the Soviet Union, were the first lot to get into space, and they were very ahead of the rest of them, in the space race, until the early 60s, with the Americans taking over on the moon. Now the Chinese have got there. Now the Chinese, well, they're a strange, the Communist Party there is strange because it is capitalistic. We can't deny it is capitalistic. The only thing is it's not democratic. That's the point. That's why, the whole idea of democracy, how certain are you about democracy? Look, they always argue capitalism and democracy to go together, and Marxism and authoritarianism go together. Well, what is Marxist about the People's Republic of China, right?
I mean, I think the Chinese have done a fantastic job in selling communism through capitalism.
That's it, and that's the thing. I mean, if you look at Maulana Maududi's what is capitalism, socialism, and Islam, and in fact, many political philosophers now they call it the horseshoe ideological spectrum rather than the left-right spectrum. He actually called it the horseshoe, and that fascism and socialism. The thing that links them is totalitarianism in that sense, right? So, so going back to this idea, what you said about the capitalist agenda in that sense, yes, we think progress is through scientific. Look, all civilizations had science. The point is the consumer element of science that we see now is something new in the human experience in that sense. But at the same time, look, what we're seeing is the West aren't leading the way in this anymore. So it's not really the white peoples no longer are at the forefront of this. Chinese have just now, they've achieved quantum computing. I mean, they've shook America with this because they've managed to quantum compute, wherever that means. Look, those of you who are in Dhaka University or elsewhere, they're very good at computing, right? Wherever that means, the Chinese have achieved that before the Americans or anybody else. Another thing now that they've got this, what Reagan wanted to do in the 1980s, the Star Wars program of space missiles. The Chinese have achieved this now, right? And whereas it was bluff from Reagan. So look, for ourselves, what we're, I guess, with the doubt issue is something which many of the ulama before did actually highlight. And one of them was Sheikh Abdulaziz bin Baz rahmatullahi alayhi, right, the Mufti of Saudi Arabia during the 90s. Well, he died in the 90s. And he actually argued what he called al-ghazw al-fikri, the ideological attack. And in many ways, look, that is where we are at now. The ideological, look, the war of ideology was there in World War II. Now is basically the attack on our ways of thinking. And one thing we have to understand is that Islam has to be, our Muslims have to be ready for that challenge. In the past, they always called these things the shubuhat. So you said doubt industries, just going back to the words that our ulama use, the shubuhat stuff. And it's a case of just effectively dealing with these these contradictions in that sense. And I think last week I mentioned what Goldziher said about the prophets were quite comfortable with dealing with these rather than searching for absolute certainty, because it's in the heart, in terms of yaqeen and itminan, and it's not always rational. This is the problem. Sometimes we like last week we spoke about the benefits of akal and nakal. Now let's take Imam Ali's example of lo yuqadul ad-dinu bir-ra'i, right? So if the knowledge was taken through ra'i alone, and that's why we have to think about, what is it called again? Emotional quotient as well, not just intelligence quotient. If it's all intelligence, look, then we can do away with the human race and artificial intelligence can take over and look after the planet, right? And they can be the khalifas on this earth, our own product in that sense. But no, emotional quotient is something that makes human beings human, not just the intelligence quotient. There are intelligent animals. The octopus is an intelligent animal. The dolphin is, right? Obviously, all primates too are intelligent, right? And so if that answers your question in terms of our, how science itself has been utilized as part of the consumer process as well. Look how mobile phones, technologies just generally as well. But many of the cultures have incorporated this technology, and they're not buying into the secularization process or the package that science comes with, which is supposed to be capitalism. And remember, at one time it was communism as well. Where people are buying into that sort of stuff. They're just taking the technology and using it for their own stuff.
Doctor, some of the modern challenges for us, let's say, for example, আমরা এই যে মনে করেন যে আমরা minority একটা community হিসেবে বসবাস করতেছি in the West, in England or in America and other places, to Muslim majority lands like Bangladesh, এইসব জায়গা যে মানে যে সন্দেহ তৈরি করার যে কিছু পথ এবং আমরা রূপ দেখতেছি কি, we can see some roads that towards creating doubt within the Muslim, particularly if you like the second, third generation, and sometimes doubt, this sense of the doubt creation is almost like seen as enlightenment. So then that's also coming into Muslim societies from an academic and a theorist angle. And some of the on the ground, মানে একদম সাধারণ মানুষের বাস্তব জীবনের ভিতরে, you're having things like a moral and social concern. So for example, as a, like Muslimanra, they're having to reconcile their Islam with society's newly defined ethics. So for example, let's say, like same sex and this and that, there is a big kind of dichotomy of a young person trying to reconcile this situation that they're in. For example, that's one area. Then you have the philosophical and scientific concern, which is really about, which is based around the irrationality of faith. মানে যে আসলে ধর্ম তো কোনো সেন্স বানায় না, মানে যে জিনিস আমরা দেখতে পারতেছি না এটার উপর আমাদের এত অন্ধবিশ্বাস কেন, এটা দিয়ে আমরা এত উৎসাহিততা পাইতেছি কেন। So that becomes, the idea of having to see everything, to believe in it, to be able to appreciate and value it, is another route through which we are impacted. And then you have আরেকটা হইতে পারে যে personal trauma, যে মনে করেন যে আমার ব্যক্তির, আমি একজন আমার সবচেয়ে প্রিয় মানুষকে হারাইলাম, এটা আমার জন্য কেন হইলো। অথবা আরেকটা হইতে পারে যে যারা ধর্মের প্রতিনিধি, ওরা যখন সিরিয়াস ক্রাইম করে, মানে for example abuse and those kind of things, that also puts into the whole idea of, like how can religion really be something if it's making the religious become so irreligious. I hope you're understanding some of the points I'm trying to raise.
Absolutely. Look,
how do we navigate some of these? These are genuine questions for our third, fourth, fifth generation. If we're thinking these are genuine questions for us here in this part of the world, then some of this is filtering down to majority Muslim spaces, which may not still grapple that much. But in terms of those who are seeing themselves as enlightened, they're asking this question that,
Look, first of all, I guess one of the the ethical questions you mentioned, same-sex marriage and things, right? But there's a community, right, which is the LGBTQ, and it didn't end there. Look, in the 80s, it was the gay community, and by gay they meant homosexual and also lesbians. Then it became lesbian, gay, and bisexual communities. So it was just LGB, and it didn't end there because look, in all honesty, these peoples could, there's a concept of coming out, right? So LGBT, right, are coming out about their sexuality. But the people who actually suffered the most out of this group were the transsexuals because of a third sex type of issue. Now, we look as Muslims, and this is our history. I'm not talking about the halal and haram stuff, right? We've just dealt with these things as look. Halal,
no, I'm not giving my opinion about this being right.
No. But halal, look, I'm just talking about.
I'm talking about this being a challenge.
Yeah, I'm trying to get to it. Look, the point is this: is that it's fluid. Look, I just said it was gay first, then it was gay and lesbian community, then it gay, lesbian, and bisexual, then it became LGBT, right? And then Q was there as well. So Q was when you're not sure how you actually feel about, you're not even aware of your sexuality as such. Then you've got LGBTQ, then you got intersex. I don't even know what that is, right? It didn't end there. Then it was plus, so LGBTQI plus, and then now it's LGBTQI plus A. This is very recently. Now the point is, this is how is it so many people, so many different identity markers, right, are sort of lumped together as one, and then everyone has to accept that there's an objective reality there about all of these peoples, even though there's a lot of tensions between themselves. Now, why do we have to sign up to this sort of stuff? Look, at the end of the day, we've got our own fight as Muslims, right? And that fight, and you mentioned the Muslims, third generation. That one of the things they have to realize is, look, the priority is not only our times, since Malcolm X's time, is our own really identity of race and religion. Race and religion go together. One of the reasons why the Jewish community have been successful is because of race and religion, right? They're an ethno-religious community, right? Ourselves as well, we have to try to understand the ethno-religious plight. And if we don't, and we get caught up with all these other things, then, unfortunately, look, the whole same-sex issue is a white problem, in the sense that it's only become highlighted because of white people are suffering. When white people feel something, then it becomes real. When it isn't, then it's only perceived. So racism, the moment white people feel racism, there'll be hate. The whole concept of race is going to change because they're feeling racism now. What I'll say is this: is that look.
What about Doctor? Just before you continue, so for example, philosophical and scientific. So, for example, the idea of evolution, and that's quite a discussion within the modern world, and why that you it's not God who created you in that sense, but that we evolved as a species over time and over a period, and it's proven that that's the case. So why is there a need for irrationality like religion?
Well, the thing is, look, evolution, they're denying evolution now a lot as well. And I'm not saying it in terms of the creation argument and the emanation argument. What I'm saying is this: is look, for example, this whole binary issue, transsexual issue. What is argued against this type of gender designations is that gender is a fact. All of us are born from mothers. Yep. This is something that Dave Chappelle just recently said, and he got into trouble regarding this. He just quoted something which is an evolutionary fact. Yeah. At least evolution has taught us this: is that there are these genders. If there are other genders, but nonetheless, the fact that the survival of our species, of all of our species, relies on the fact that we pass on genes from generation to generation, which is done through reproduction, which is done through those two genders, two opposite genders coming together. Now, what is with the evolution theory is sometimes it becomes problematic at the moment, ideologically, it becomes problematic for the agenda that they want to push forward. So in the 19th century, evolution was used to argue for the master race, which was the white peoples.
So
Right.
it was a colonial tool and strategy.
Yeah, it was a colonial tool. Now it's not working for them, right? Because obviously with genetics, we're seeing that, well, we're all related to each other, right? And also now with this issue, evolution doesn't serve, the issue of gender quite well. It doesn't, Rock. The whole feminism as well. It doesn't serve that. It doesn't serve that agenda, the feminist agenda as well, because clearly, look, what was Darwin's understanding is that it's the survival of the fittest. Yep, the idea of the fairer sex, the women are weaker in that sense. All of these things are what comes out of evolutionary biology. So the thing is, this is an absolute fact. Look, the French are more skeptical about this sort of stuff. And another thing is, look, I think generally, this is my experience. I'm saying this, not the, a lot of Muslims are a lot more easier in terms of dealing with, and I'm using Sheikh Nuhamin Keller says that macrobiology, macroevolution, is quite acceptable. So the fact that the dinosaurs evolved out from millions of years into birds, or all of the animals, right? From felines to wild cats, from wild cats to domestic cats, all of that stuff is acceptable, all the way up to primates. But then man is special. That you can call microevolution. Macroevolution is everything else. So macroevolution is compatible with Islam. Microevolution is obviously the issue of man coming from primates. Well, even that issue, look, there are those amongst the Muslims who would argue, well, Allah talks about devolution, that Allah turned some human beings to monkeys and pigs and whatever else. That type of transmogrification, tamsikh, can those people become human beings again? There's a lot of that discussion that the Muslims had in the past, Ibn al-Jahiz, Miskawayh, whoever else. And in fact, going on to the evolution thing, it was actually those who critiqued Darwin at that time because they thought this is crazy. So when they critiqued Darwin, they called it the Muhammadan theory of evolution because Rumi and some of these Sufis spoke about this stuff. It doesn't mean it's correct. What I'm trying to say is that Muslims have to just realize theories are theories, nazariyat are nazariyat. And, at the moment, the theory of the creation of the universe is the Big Bang theory. Yeah, but it's a theory. The other theory before the Big Bang was that the universe has been around forever. And that in itself is still a theory, that the universe has been around forever because there's no co-eternal with God. What I'd say is that, look, is our youth have to have a level of self-confidence, right? And a level of self-love. If you don't have that, then you will be, it will be hard for you, but it's hard for all of us as well. Look, the reality, we're living in a time now, all communities, right, and especially the Muslims, we're living in a time where the entire world is a village. In fact, Amar Bishnataki, we can see exactly what's going on now.
Yes, that's right.
It's so easy now. And look, mashallah, the work that Tujal Ummah is doing, the fact that you've linked England with the Middle East and Bangladesh together, I mean, this wasn't, I don't think it was imaginable 20 years ago that we could do this in that way. Sure. So in many ways, those ideas are proliferating. And what we could do is really, identity is one of the key things we need to teach Muslims. Look, the Jewish community is very good at this sort of stuff, and Zionism serves that purpose. Zionism, it means, Jewish autonomy. That's one of the reasons that, when people attack Zionism, the Jews actually say, look, you're attacking Jewish autonomy. With us Muslims, really, our Islamic identity is this. Our Islamic politics is this as well. If you deny, a form of Islamophobia is denying Muslims autonomy. If you deny us our autonomy, and that's the key thing that we have as Muslims in the West or even in the East, Islamophobia goes on in Bangladesh as well. In Turkey, where you can't wear hijabs in universities and certain government sectors, there's a problem there. And why is it? It's because the Europeans came, and their governments imposed this sort of stuff, right? This type of secularism, right? Which really they don't practice themselves. This country, the United Kingdom, is a Christian country. It's not a secular country. It's a Christian country. The Queen is the head of state. It's a monarchy. It's a
জাযাকাল্লাহ
mulkiyat.
খায়ের ডক্টর শেখ তাজুল ইসলাম, জাযাকুমুল্লাহ খায়ের। দর্শক ভাই বোন যারাই দেখতেছেন সবাইকে শুভেচ্ছা স্বাগতম আমরা জানাচ্ছি আপনারা তুজাহাল উম্মার পক্ষ থেকে, ফেইস্তা উম্মার পক্ষ থেকে। আজকে আমাদের সাথে গেস্ট ছিলেন ডক্টর শেখ তাজুল ইসলাম, ইসলামিক স্টাডিজ এর লেকচারার, ইউনিভার্সিটি অফ লিডস, ইংল্যান্ডে। এবং আমরা সংশয়বাদ প্রতিরোধের উপায় নিয়ে আমরা আসলে ডিসকাশন করছিলাম, যে ডাউট তৈরি করা, ডাউটের এমন একটা যুগে আমরা আছি, আসলে ডাউটের কি স্টেটাস আছে এবং ডাউটকে নিয়ে আমাদের পজিশন কি, বিশেষ করে আমাদের তরুণ প্রজন্মের জন্য। এবং যে সেলফ আইডেন্টি, নিজের যে একটা পরিচয়, নিজের যে একটা আইডেন্টিটি, সেটার উপরে আমাদের একটা হিউজ কনফিডেন্স থাকতে হবে এবং বিল্ড করতে হবে। এবং বিল্ড করার জন্য আমাদের পক্ষ থেকে কাজ করতে হবে, শ্রম দিতে হবে, আন্তরিক হইতে হবে, ত্যাগ দিতে হবে, to ensure that that our young people and our future can still maintain the confidence of its own roots and its own heritage and its own Torah, and still navigate the issues of the time. ডক্টর শেখ তাজুল ইসলাম, আমাদের প্রোগ্রাম আসলে বেশি সময় আর নাই, তো আপনাকে যেটা অনুরোধ করব, আপনার পক্ষ থেকে, আপনি 2টা সেশন আমাদের সাথে করছেন, তুজাহাল উম্মার পক্ষ থেকে আপনাকে আন্তরিকভাবে অন্তঃস্থল ধন্যবাদ। জাযাকুমুল্লাহ খায়ের ফর ইওর টাইম। আপনি যদি হিসাব করেন এবং বলেন যে আমাদের উম্মার জন্য এই 5টা বিষয় আসলে খুবই গুরুত্বপূর্ণ, আপনি একজন একাডেমিক হিসেবে আপনার যেই চেয়ারটা আল্লাহ দিচ্ছেন আপনাকে, সেইটা থেকে, সেই জায়গা থেকে বসে, সেই অভিজ্ঞতা থেকে, সেই শিক্ষা থেকে যদি সবকিছু এখানে নিয়ে আমাদের উম্মার দিকে তাকান, তাহলে আপনার পক্ষ থেকে 5 প্রায়োরিটি, এই 5টা প্রায়োরিটি কি হইতে পারে?
Okay, 5 priorities. Okay, I did give some time to think about this. Remember, these 5 priorities, order like 1 to 5 is just 5 different ones.
There's no tartib.
Tartib in that sense.
Overall,
I'll mention one of the issues first, is a general understanding of Qibla. And by Qibla, I'm meaning metaphorically, is those things, those musallamat, those things that actually that signify what is Islam.
As in, okay.
That signify what is Islam.
মানে আহলুল কিবলার কথা বলতেছেন না, but
no, just Qibla itself. The idea of the Qibla is obviously towards Makkah, right. But metaphorically, majaz, right? Ala sabil al majaz. We're talking about. So, for example, look, we all understand from east to west what Islam is. A part of that, so this is number one, is one of the most important issues at the moment is Muslim dignity. So that Muslim dignity issue is embodied in the plight of the Palestinians, right?
Okay.
So that's
মুসলমানের ইজ্জত এবং মুসলমানের সম্মান, মানে একটা উম্মার নাগরিক হিসাবে যে ওইটা হইলো আমাদের জন্য মানে বড় একটা দায়িত্ব এবং নৈতিক কর্তব্য, সব সময় এটাকে
Philistine encapsulates at this particular moment. Right. In the past, it would have been other issues. Look, as Abdullah ibn al-Mubarak says, كيف القرار وكيف يهدأ المسلم والمسلمات عند العدو المعتدي. How is it the Muslims are going to be calm when the Muslim women are in captivity in the hands of the enemies? So that's number one. Number two is the question of Muslim unity. And the question of Muslim unity, there was আমরা বাংলাদেশে যারা নাগরিক হল, আপনারা বাইতুল মুকাররমার ইমাম একজন আসলাম, মুফতি আমিনুল ইহসান সাহেব রাহমাতুল্লাহ আলাইহি। সো মুফতি আমিনুল ইহসান সাহেব এক কিতাব, একটা পুস্তক, একটা উর্দু ভাষায় তাই লিখছেন, নাম ছিল ইলমে তারিখে ফিকহ। তো এই কিতাবে তাই কি করলেন, he identified at least 8 different sects of the Ummah. So that includes the 5 Sunni, including the Ahl Hadith, and the Jafaris, the Ismailis, the Zaydis, and the Ibadis as well. So actually 9. He includes 9. And that was in the 1950s. So I'm talking about Mufti Amimul Ihsan, especially the issue of unity itself. And at the time, Tanre, they wanted to make him the Mufti Azam of Pakistan. But because they said he had to move to West Pakistan, he said, look, main mulk chhod ke nahi ja sakta. So he gave it to Mufti Shafi. So they'll know who he is, right?
That's Dr. Sheikh Taqi Usman
Taqi Usmani's father,
alleged
yeah,
father,
Taqi Usmani's father, right? So Mufti Amimul Ihsan didn't take the position, and that was in the 1950s, right? Yahya Khan wanted him to be. It's not Yahya Khan. Ayub Khan wanted him to be the Mufti Azam of Pakistan. Anyway, then what happens is in the 2004, there's the Amman message. Now there are some critiques of it, and myself, I did a thesis.
The Amman Declaration.
Amman Declaration. Look, I did my thesis was on this, my PhD thesis. It has some problems with it, but largely speaking, I think it's a very good framework, and it links to Mufti Amimul Ihsan's efforts, about 4 decades before, right? 3-4 decades before. And the Amman message provides us with 5 Sunni madhabs and 3 non-Sunni madhabs that at least highlight what is the broader global ummah at the moment. Not
So
just
that you will also probably say as the Ahlul Qibla in general.
Ahlul Qibla here. So this is point number 2. So the first one was actually a Qibla, which is the Qibla of issues. Second is the Qibla of the peoples. The third issue is a Muslim power corridor. And this is something which the Professor Salman Saeed speaks about. And it's one which is historical, is Turkey, Iran and Pakistan. Right? If these 3 countries can work together, now we've seen it with the Taliban now and Iran. So the sectarian stuff, Sunni Shia stuff, overcome these things. We will see a powerful bloc there. And what we're seeing is something which was historical, it's not new. Ottoman Empire, Safavid Empire, Mughal Empire, these 3 were connected together. If that bloc can stay strong, and then other blocks work with it, like in Africa, the African Union or the Muslim, countries of Africa, and then the Middle East, you got the Arab League, and then Indonesia, Malaysia, and some of those other countries as well, the SAARC countries together. This is something that, look, for the future of the OIC, the Organization of the Islamic Cooperation now, not the Islamic Conference. We're already seeing, look, one of the things in the Bosnian genocide, what we saw was Bangladesh, Pakistan offered 15,000 troops, and the West were embarrassed because nobody was willing to give troops.
As in peacekeeping troops.
Peacekeeping troops. So the thing is, Erdogan and others are promoting these sort of things, and hopefully, look, Bangladesh is an emerging economic tiger. To think of these decisions, working with Muslim countries as well, civilizations working for civilizations, working with others as well. These are the things. So point number 3 is a corridor of power. Or corridor of power.
Do you think something like this will need time for it to really become something solid, given the needs of the Muslim countries and their people and their societies, look, even on a basic level where they have basic needs that need to be satisfied?
I understand, right? Look, at the moment, look, this is something, look, Bangladesh is making some good decisions, with neighboring countries as well, right? It's playing its politics right at the moment in terms of economic politics as well. But look, he has to realize it's part of a much larger community now, the Ummah. It's far more integrated Bangladesh than it was, in the 1970s and 80s, where it was very much neglected by others. So Bangladesh, is something for you to think about. Number 4 would be really this.
You're saying Bangladesh should not forget its Muslim identity through which it has come about.
Without Amra Bangladesh, we created Pakistan because we wanted to be part of Pakistan. We wanted our Islamic identity. The only reason Bangladesh was created is because of the inequities of the Pakistan model. That's it. We didn't become India. This was the argument. Everyone always thought, if you're going to ask for your rights, you're just going to become India. Bangladesh to Bangladesh was like, that's it. Right? Things have normalized now with Pakistan and, other Muslim countries as well. So yes, the identity of Bangladesh as a Muslim country, that is crucial as well. Right? That's part of this.
That does not necessarily mean that the rest of the diverse communities that it has
absolutely not.
Should be impacted in a negative way.
At the end of the day, who's complaining when we say Israel is a Jewish country? Does that mean that there's no Muslims there? Does that mean there's no Christians there? Right? Nobody criticizes Israel regarding that. Well, just likewise, Bangladesh is a Muslim country, and there's 10% or more, 17%. I'm not sure how much Hindus are there and other minorities, which is fine. They're Bangladeshis, right? They're part of the Ummah Ijaba, as they call it. Right? That's what it is. The point 4 is really this is something which is epistemic or for us. One of the priorities of the Muslim Ummah is, look, worldwide at the moment, there's this Black Lives Matter phenomenon, right? The struggle for civil rights. In the 1960s, many of the Arab countries really supported Malcolm X and the movement in America, civil rights movement in America. Right now, it's a priority for us Muslims because of the rise of Islamophobia. Look, Islamophobia is a type of racism that targets expressions of Muslimness and perceived Muslimness.
So are you now referring to people who are living in minority lands in the West?
Not even majority countries as well. Even majority countries. Look, we have to understand, at the end of the day, racism affects us on two levels. When you're a minority, but also majority countries. Why was Bangladesh put on the red list and India not? Even though the Delta variant, the Indian variant, yeah, the Delta variant. Do you remember that? Bangladesh and Pakistan were put on the red list, but not India. Why was that? Right, because of Islamophobia. That's the only reason they did this. Now, my point is this: is that, look, we need to battle Islamophobia throughout the world. Pakistan's done a good job on this. They've actually got a monitoring group that monitors the entire Western media and Indian media, especially on Islamophobic content. On a monthly basis, they do this. Right? Pakistan has actually got, and Punjab University, we saw some of these documents. It was very good. So the fifth one is one which is very much for our madaris now. This is the last thing for our madaris, is a sense of confidence. To instill in us a sense of confidence and pride that, look, you're part of this Yateem Ummah at this moment. And how we do this sort of stuff is our madrasas, we don't need to update much stuff. The madaris system is very good. It's something I teach myself and I like.
When you say update, as in the syllabus is fine?
No, we don't need to. The syllabus is fine, right? The thing is, this is there is something that we need to teach in the madaris, right? Two things, sorry, which is part of the.
As in, we need to add. We're not necessarily
taking away, but
we're trying to add more.
Yeah, one of the things is, look, it's the fact that we've already got falsafa, we already got logic and the rest of it. It shows that the intellectual aptitude is already there. The syllabus has it, right? The sciences, the philosophies of our time have changed. And one of the most empowering philosophies is three of them into one. We can call it critical Muslim studies. So it's giving us that ability of looking at things critically. And that includes three strands. One is basically racism in Americas, which is called critical race theory. Now you can see a lot of white people are concerned about critical race theory. It's very important for us because, look, it helps us understand Islamophobia. And the other two is decolonial studies, which was the struggle of Latin American peoples against American imperialism. And the third one, which is Bangladesh, Pakistan, and India, which is post-colonial studies. Those three things, if they're incorporated into the madrasa syllabus now, as in like taught, I think our Maulanas, our Imam Sahibs, our Da'is, and activists really will help us formulate a way out of a lot of the problems that the Ummah is facing. And the last thing which is connected to this is, look, in my experience of teaching and also meeting with Christians and Jewish scholars, is very much they learn Arabic, right? It's part of their studies that they need to know, have some working understanding of Islam. And in my own teaching, it's been very beneficial to know Hebrew, which is Arabic as far as we're concerned. It's just Ammiya. Those of us who know Arabic, right? Hebrew, you can. Hazrat Abu Bakr learned it in less than a month, and it's absolutely possible. Hebrew, because the Prophet said you need to learn it. I won't need to know what Bani Nadir and these people are writing, because they used to write Arabic with the Hebrew script, so they had to learn the alphabet first as well. Plus, the language is easy, right? Syriac, and some of the languages that the Torah and the Injil have been written in is important for our Muslim Imams. So basically, we're going back to Izhar al-Haq, Sheikh Ahmad Didat, even Dr. Zakir Naik and all that, but really going back to Maulana Rahmatullah Hindi, was it Khalil Rahman Hindi? Sorry, Khalil Rahman Hindi from Izhar al-Haq. So a type of Izhar al-Haq stuff, which is connected to the linguistic studies of the tradition, Ma'thur, Masuret, all of these things.
Jazakallah khair, Dr. Sheikh Tajul Islam. We've deliberately actually gone 10 past 1 to facilitate
My
this very
apologies.
important. Not at all, not at all. This is an important part of the discussion. যে আপনার পক্ষ থেকে উম্মার জন্য সবচেয়ে প্রয়োজনীয় 5টা প্রায়োরিটিজ এটা। আমি আপনি যদি ওইগুলি আবার রিপিট একটু করতে পারেন আমাদের দর্শকের জন্য।
So the first one is the issues of the Ummah, which is Palestine at the moment, right?
Yeah.
And Palestine incorporates Rohingya, China, all of the issues around the world, right? Kashmir as well.
So you're talking about that sense of Qibla.
Sense of Qibla.
Okay.
Number
and the
2
second one
is basically Ahl al-Qibla and the Amman message, Amman declaration, which is
appreciating the key diversity within the Sunnis as well as some of the specific Shia as well.
Look, the Taliban have shown this. Look, these are people who have been they've been pariahs for so long, and now Iran is supporting the Taliban, and if they can do it, right, these pariahs, why can't we?
Inshallah.
Get on. Number 3 was the issue of what was it again? So number 2 is the Qibla. Number 3 was my God, I forgot. Right. I think it was power corridor.
That's
Pakistan,
right.
Turkey,
Pakistan, Iran, and
Turkey.
Yeah.
And Turkey could lead on this issue because of obviously the military and economic might of these countries as well.
In to develop greater cooperation and become a much
exactly
more
for OIC
block
for OIC.
through which to add more value to the other cause and needs of the overall Muslim community and society across the globe.
Number 4 was the Islamophobia issue. Look, Islamophobia at the moment worldwide is a problem, right? Including Bangladesh. Look, at the end of the day.
Well, I mean, India is a classical example of Muslims who fought for the independence of India.
Exactly.
And sadly, the situation at this moment in time with the Muslim Pullah in India, not, if you like, in some of the neighboring countries.
Yeah. And then also the last one was so that's Islamophobia. The last one is the Madaris and incorporating what's called critical madrasa studies, or critical Muslim studies and critical madrasa studies. So critical madrasa studies is this stuff of Hebrew, Syriac, and basically the Ahle Kitabi stuff. Being able to articulate that, because look, that's where we come across on the dawah field with Christians and others.
Number 5 নম্বর যেটা আপনি বলতেছেন, বিশেষ করে আমাদের দর্শক যারাই দেখতেছে, যারা তুল্লাব অথবা তালিবুল ইলম অথবা শুয়ুখ এন্ড উলামা যাদেরকে ধরে নেওয়া হয়, বিশেষ করে মাদ্রাসা প্রতিষ্ঠানে, যেখানে আপনি বলতেছেন না যে এই সিলেবাস মনে করেন যে দার্সের নিজামে পরিবর্তন করার কোনো প্রয়োজন, বিশেষ করে সাউথ ইস্ট এশিয়ার কথা আমরা এখানে এই কনটেক্সটে বলি, কিন্তু আপনি বলতেছেন যে ইট হ্যাজ অলরেডি এ লট, আর আমরা আর কি কি ঢুকাইতে পারবো, এবং এই ঢুকানোর বিষয়ে আপনি কি কি ঢুকানো উচিত?
That's it. So you can call it critical madrasa studies. So it includes having knowledge of Judaism, Christianity, and also Hinduism and Buddhism. Just a general knowledge of these things, especially Judaism and Christianity, because they're Ahle Kitab, and they're Ahle Kitab's knowledge in that sense. So Hebrew.
আপনি ল্যাঙ্গুয়েজের কথাও ইন্ডিকেট করছিলেন।
Language. Look, I've learned Hebrew. I've learned a bit of Latin. Latin is easier. Greek is a bit hard, but through Kombesh, I've tried to understand this. Look, Farsi Zaban as well. Again, Amral Madrasa Asil. So these are important. These languages, I think, will help us. Because look, Arabic is being taught. Arabic, Farsi, and other languages are being learned in the West for strategic interests as well. Well, we should for these things as well.
Jazakallah khair, Sheikh Dr. Tajul Islam, Professor of Islamic Studies, University of Leeds, England. ধন্যবাদ। তুজাহাল উম্মার পক্ষ থেকে যত দর্শকে দেখতেছেন সবাইকে অনুরোধ করব, লাইক করবেন, শেয়ার করবেন, ফলো করবেন এবং কমেন্টস করবেন। ইনশাআল্লাহ আগামী সপ্তাহে আমরা বাংলাদেশের মানে খুব প্রতিষ্ঠিত একজন আলিম শেখ উবাইদুল্লাহ হামজা ইনশাআল্লাহ আমাদের সাথে শরীক হবেন। আমরা ওনার কাছ থেকে, আমাদের উস্তাদ হিসাবে ওনার কাছে বহু কিছু আছে আমাদের শিক্ষা অর্জন করার। আমরা ওয়াজের বিষয়টা নিয়ে আমরা সিদ্ধান্ত নিয়েছি আলোচনা করার, ওয়াজ কি জিনিস, ওয়াজ কোথায় আছে, ওয়াজ কোথায় যাওয়া উচিত এবং কি অ্যাচিভ করা উচিত। বড় একটা ফিনোমেনন বিশেষ করে সাউথ ইস্ট এশিয়া এবং বাংলাদেশে। এবং ডক্টর শেখ তাজুল ইসলাম, ফাইনালি মানে দিস ইজ আমাদের ফেস দ্য উম্মার পক্ষ থেকে জাস্ট সাবজেক্টের একটু বাইরে। আমি জানি আপনার অরিজিন হলো বাংলাদেশে, আমার অরিজিন বাংলাদেশে। বাংলাদেশের 2টা ফুটবল টিমকে খুবই পছন্দ করে, ওই দুইটা ফুটবল টিমের ভিতরে আপনার ফেভারিট ফুটবল টিম কোনটা আপনার? আপনি কি আর্জেন্টিনা
I
না
don't.
আপনি কি আর্জেন্টিনা না ব্রাজিল?
All right. Well, now you have to get right. I'm Argentina.
মানে ওয়ার্ল্ড ওয়ার 3 শুরু হবে না হোপফুলি।
No, no, Argentina. I thought Bangladesh would do pure team. I thought you were saying Mohammedan or Kita.
No, I'm Mohammedan Abu Hani.
Abu Hani, that's it. Those, that's it. I thought you were saying
I'm talking
Mohammedan.
about the two classic
Brazil was
footballing
again.
nations, Brazil
I've
or
always
Argentina.
actually আমি আর্জেন্টিনা মারাডোনা থাকি, so 1986 থাকি I've been Maradona fan.
আচ্ছা,
আর
মরহুম মারাডোনা থেকে আপনার শুরু হয়েছে নাকি? Okay, জাযাকাল্লাহ খাইর। Thank you so much once again. ইনশাআল্লাহ আমার আশা আছে যে আপনাকে আবার দাওয়াত দিব ইনশাআল্লাহ। আপনার সবার জন্য আন্তরিকভাবে ধন্যবাদ। Thank you so much for your time and জাযাকাল্লাহ খাইর। আল্লাহ কবুল করুক এবং এটার মাধ্যমে আমরা সবাই আরো আলোকিত হইতে পারি এবং এটার মাধ্যমে আল্লাহর সাথে আমাদের সম্পর্ক আরো গভীর হইতে পারে, সেটাই আমাদের উদ্দেশ্য ইনশাআল্লাহ। May Allah give us that tawfiq to use our learning to strengthen our understanding and our role as humans and Muslims on earth and as an ummah and our responsibilities, and that we leave a legacy with our words and deeds for the time that Allah has written for us. Jazakumullah khair. We will stay in touch and I look forward to the comments. আপনারা অবশ্যই লাইক করবেন, শেয়ার করবেন, ফলো করবেন, কমেন্টস করবেন। আগামী সপ্তাহে আবার দেখা হবে ইনশাআল্লাহ। এরপরে মাস আমরা রোববারে আমাদের সেশনগুলো নিয়ে নিব ইনশাআল্লাহ। So the last one will be next Saturday and then the following month Tujahul Ummah will come on a Sunday inshallah at the same time. Once again, we have taken extra time deliberately. I've allowed that. Otherwise, normally we finish around 1 p.m. So once again, Dr. Sheikh Tazul Islam, we will speak to you very soon on behalf of Tujahul Ummah, Face the Ummah. Thank you so much. Jazakumullah khair. Our salam and regards to your family. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.